Hello and welcome to our second English for Design workshop, and this one is about close reading. So here we're going to begin with a bonus round because I think it's something important to discuss, which I think is probably not discussed enough. These papers have been selected for you to read, right? And what is the likelihood that you are already interested in all of these themes? It's probably pretty unlikely. So what we're going to try to do is right from the very start, we're going to try and reframe the reading in a way that it's interesting for something we care about. So this week, you have been asked to read Bruno Latour's discussion of the Berlin Key. Now, a lot of people find this very abstract. I would say that it's probably one of the harder readings that you have in this course. And I'm going to try and reframe it in a way that shows how I understand the important points of this piece. So the key lesson that I'm trying to describe here is that you need to read and research until you actually care about the problem being described, because it's very likely that in some way you will actually care about what the author is talking about. Often our motivation comes from understanding how these things can apply to our lives, to our research, to our hometown or friends or family, something that we've personally experienced. Maybe it's something about our entire generation. Perhaps it could be something about our deep hopes for the world or the traumas that we envisage coming in the future. My hope is that once you find out something that is personal or interesting or even original in the text, you may then get excited about it, even if you didn't think you would. You can then offer this to us in seminar as an important talking point to get discussion going. So in many ways, Latour's paper is about this obscure key for this obscure lot, and it's a discussion of who can and cannot access certain spaces. In many ways, it's about the agency of the object and how design can control us. I have a very direct experience of this since I used to lecture for UCA and Xiamen University, and when I went to China and I was working in their campus, there was a security feature on my door which would record the faces of the people who came to the door, and then it would say whether you could access or not. And I'm not sure how these datasets worked, but it always used to deny me entry. And sometimes, if it did recognize my face as a face at all, it would recognize me as a different person with a beard, just another white member of staff who happens to also work on the same campus. Now, this plays into deep and important ideas of datasets, artificial intelligence, security, and who is writing the algorithms that are increasingly controlling our lives. This links up with the idea of the Berlin Key very neatly, because not only is it a doorway or a threshold, and it's about access and control, but it also brings those themes into today's world. I was able to interpret these things which I actually care about and I think are interesting because I was doing a close reading of the text, which is what we will now discuss. So, what is close reading? If you think of the story of the tortoise and the rabbit ran very fast and got most of the race done pretty quickly, but you can imagine that if this was a reading competition, they would have probably skipped over quite a lot of detail. The tortoise, on the other hand, is slow. You can say that maybe they're detailed. Maybe they're aiming for accuracy rather than speed. Maybe it will help you to understand the language of other disciplines. For example, you may be someone from a real estate background trying to understand something from a philosophy background, for example. Or perhaps you're an architect trying to read something relating to art history. These disciplines have their own vocabularies and their own traditions, and especially in a second language, it's going to take you some time to work out what they're talking about. So we're going to go word by word, and we're actually going to do some research whilst we're reading. We will be taking our time and making sure that we understand what we're reading. Close reading and skim reading can both be used together. Now, importantly, these are not necessarily opposites. Close reading and skim reading can be used together to get a quick overview, and then you just slow down when you think you need to concentrate. It's not an either or. It's a kind of understanding of when you need each one. At the GSD, you will encounter text from a wide range of disciplines, each with their own words and styles. They may come from art history, or artist statements, for example. You could be dealing with anthropological, sociological, or psychological texts. Frequently, we deal with philosophy or theology. And then there are engineering, biology, chemistry, physics, the hard sciences. Quite often, we may be engaged in reading things relating to finance, real estate, or ecology. It can be like learning a new language, and it does take time. You will begin slowly, but you will get faster. Before we go any further, I just want to do a note on AI and large language models. We aren't going to be able to prevent you from using them, and that is really not our aim. The only thing that we want to tell you is please check. Always check. Many of you are already using ChatGPT and other large language models to summarize texts. In this context, it's not going to work. You really do need close reading. ChatGPT, for example, can be used for getting quick summaries, looking up unfamiliar terms, and clarifying general concepts. However, they can miss the tone, the structure, or the nuance of a passage. They can flatten the complexity which the author was trying to get, or they can even misinterpret things, like metaphors are quite difficult to get sometimes. One big danger is that they might make you kind of boring and a little bit unoriginal. These are used from data sets. These are not original human thoughts. They can't replace your own insight, and they cannot replace critical reading. These are things that you really do need to do for yourself. Aside from research, do not use ChatGPT to write any of your work. This is something we do not want to see. This counts as academic misconduct, and you may be failed for this. And trust me, I have failed people for this. So, let's go. First of all, zoom out. When you're reading, start with the big questions. Where are you? When are you? Why is this being written? And how is it being written? Think of it like a map. You zoom right out and you try and locate yourself. You can look for clues. As we did in the last workshop, you can look for the title, the author, the date. What about the location or the publisher? Really importantly, is this a translation, or was this written in the original language? Is there an introduction or an abstract you can read? Or a table of contents that you can look at if it's a book? What are the other chapters? These are similar things that we were doing when we were preparing our presentation in the last workshop. Are there reviews or summaries online? And what field does this sit in? What kind of discipline are you dealing with? And from what perspective? It could be a feminist art historian, or it could be statistics about a colonial outpost. For example, Yat Ming Liu is Malaysian, writing in 2013 about colonial architecture in Kuala Lumpur from a post-colonial view. For example, we can even learn quite a lot from the front cover. So here we have Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison by Michel Foucault. And at the top, we also have a quote, must be reckoned with by humanists, social scientists, and political activists, from the New York Times Book Review. Here we have some more front matter. We can see that it is translated from French. So here we can see that it was actually translated from the French by Alan Sheridan. It was originally published in 1975 in French, and then again in 1977 in New York in English. We also have an image on the cover here which helps us understand a bit of the feeling and the tone of the book. Now, I'm using an online book, and I can see here the breakdown of the contents. So on the right, I even have a section which is about the author, which is incredibly useful for me. I can see that Michel Foucault was born in France in 1926. I can see that his field is philosophy. And if we return to the title, we can see that this was translated from the French by Alan Sheridan. And actually, Discipline and Punishment was originally published in French as To Surveil and To Punish. The emphasis on surveillance of the French title is lost in the usual English translation of Discipline and Punish. Now, I can be tempted to go and use Wikipedia, and again, I'm going to do a little warning here. Anything that we do find on Wikipedia, we do need to check with other sources. So I can see here a brief summary. Foucault is described as dealing with relationships between power and knowledge. He is cited usually as a structuralist and a postmodernist. And we can see here that Foucault rejected these labels. We can see that he's coming from a critical theory perspective. So what is structuralism? Well, we can click on that and try to understand a bit of what that's about. And we can jump to ChatGPT and ask it some questions as well. But as mentioned before, please try and triangulate these with other research that you really trust from reliable sources. Are there any videos that you can watch on the matter? Can you do a quick Google search and find a kind of explainer? And again, please try to make sure that these explainers are from reliable sources that you trust. Here, it says that Foucault explores how societal attitudes towards punishment shifted from public executions and torture to psychological evaluations and incarceration. So the key takeaway about these types of research, as mentioned, is just to check and make sure that you've understood it correctly and that you've found reliable, meaningful sources which are not going to lead you astray. For example, the Oxford English Dictionary is a great place to go and search terms and make sure that they say the same thing that you've read in other places. Also, you can use the Harvard Library database called Hollis. You can search not only for the text itself, but texts which are about that text. Now, we've zoomed out. Let's zoom in. We're in part 3, which is about discipline. And we're in part 3 of part 3, which is panopticonism. What is a panopticon? So if we do a quick Google search, we get this AI overview, which describes it as a social phenomenon where individuals internalize the feeling of being constantly watched, leading to them self-regulating their behavior. And we have an image here on the right. We can also see here that the panopticon is a structure developed by the English social theorist Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. It was designed to allow prisoners to be observed by a single guard stationed at the center of this structure. Here we have an image of the Illinois State Penitentiary. Let's return to the text now. This passage opens Foucault's chapter on panopticonism. Rather than starting with the panopticon itself, he begins with a historical example, a plague management order from the 17th century, to show how architecture and surveillance were already being used as tools for discipline. This is a kind of contextualizing device. We can start by reading it and marking any words that we don't recognize. Here is some fairly uncommon vocabulary. So the word order on its own is not uncommon, but in this sentence it feels unusual. The following, according to an order published at the end of the 17th century, were the measures to be taken when the plague appeared in a town. So here, what does order mean? Well, we can look it up on Oxford Dictionary and find that it is an official instruction from authority. What is a plague even? Well, if we look that up, we can find that it's a mass contagious illness. We can then go through all of the words that we don't understand and slowly try to understand what the sentence is telling us. Partitioning, for example, is dividing space. Prohibition is a formal ban. An intendant as an official person. Pain of death as a term might be violating rules which could lead to you being killed, for example. We can then think about what is the tone that is being described here. Is it one of fear and control? It does seem to be that way. Some of the words that we can pull out here are order, strict spatial partitioning, prohibition, pain of death, killing, authority of a syndic, surveillance, condemned to death, lock, from the outside. Why do you think that the author might want to build tension in this way? Could it be part of the narrative that he is building about his larger argument? Part of doing close reading is to understand the feeling and the tone that is being described to you. Next, we can try to understand the physical space which is being described to us. There are different scales. For example, a town is being discussed. Strict spatial partitioning is about dividing space up. He discusses districts, distinct quarters, streets. Sometimes he discusses interiors, like indoors. The door of each house, he's discussing the thresholds. Small wooden canals, and other things like this. Can you imagine what it's like to be in the world that he's describing? What does the space look like and how does it function? And one of the key points here is that you are reading like a detective. Slow down, explore the context. Focus on the word choice and the structure. What is repeated? What is the tone? Try to imagine the space that is being described to you, particularly in our disciplines and in our department. We need to understand what the space is like that is being described and try and navigate it in our minds as the situation is being explained to us. And I would argue, most importantly, try and find the parts which actually interest you, things that you care about. You can make a note of these, and hopefully you can pull them out during the seminars, ask people questions about them, give ideas of your own personal experience, and relate them to the text. And this is what I would recommend to do to try and help the seminar leaders along. So, after all of that, let's return to the thing that I think is interesting about this text for me. I could perhaps give some kind of anecdote, such as, when I was working in Xiamen, I experienced a case that I felt similar to the Berliner key, but updated for the digital age. I was often locked out of my apartment because the facial recognition system did not recognize me. When the door did rarely open, it recognized me as one of my white colleagues. This feeds into a discussion on datasets and biases. The BBC reports that in the US, the reverse is found. A US government study suggests that facial recognition algorithms are far less accurate at identifying African American and Asian faces compared to Caucasian faces in the context of the US. So, with that in mind, my seminar question for this week may be something like this. In light of examples like this, has the digital age changed the nature of Latour's claims about how design controls behavior? Or have these mechanisms simply become more opaque or invisible and harder to challenge? The key idea that I'm discussing here is that Latour in the digital age is just as relevant as he was before. In fact, maybe even slightly more relevant, because now we're dealing with a kind of black box scenario where we don't even really understand the mechanisms at play. I hope that this workshop has been useful in helping you prepare for seminars, and I very much hope that you are able to find something that you really care about in all of these texts. I'm absolutely sure that it's possible. Okay, thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you all in section on Wednesday.